So I bring attention to this. So this is Donald Trump's original tariff threat. This was the original tweet, the original Truth Social that went out to warn our country here in Canada about the incoming tariffs. And I bring this to attention because while the mainstream media and politicians want to fearmonger you and tell you how much of a monster that Trump is, that he's doing this intentionally to undermine the Canadian democracy and economic presence of Canada so he could take over it, they leave out this vital part. And they leave this out intentionally because if you knew about the original proposal, then you'll understand why the Canadian politicians are deliberately lying to you. They're gaslighting you. So Donald Trump stated that everyone is aware thousands of people pouring in through Mexico and Canada, bringing crime and drugs at levels never seen before. Right now, a caravan coming from Mexico, composed of thousands of people, seem to be unstoppable in its quest to come through our currently open border. On January 20th, as of my first executive orders, I will sign all necessary documents to charge Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff on all products coming into the United States and its ridiculous open border. So ridiculous. This tariff will remain in effect until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all the illegal aliens stop this invasion from our country. Both Mexico and Canada have the absolute right and power to easily resolve this long-simmering problem. We hereby demand that they use this power until such time that they do. It is time for them to pay a very big price. So what that states is that Canada had an ultimate decision. And the reason that Donald Trump proposed these tariffs, at least in my view, is the fact that he is the leader of our neighboring country. He is the leader of the United States, which is the southern neighboring country. And because we know about our fentanyl crisis, we know about the criminal escapades that go on in this country, we know about how corrupted our politicians to allow this to happen, it's affecting his people. It's affecting America. And being the leader of America, he's concerned about this. So obviously being concerned and being the leader of America, he's going to make accusations to the country that's solely responsible for it, that needs to do something, needs to act up to this because it's affecting his people. So, Vancouver Sun, this is back from December of 2024. Prominent Western gangs have worldwide drug networks pose security threat in Canada, report finds. Canadian organized crime groups have expanded internationally and remain a critical threat to the country's security, a new report says. So the reason I'm showing you this, and the reason I show you Trump's original tweet here, is because Donald Trump may have been onto something. But the mainstream media will never tell you this. Politicians will never tell you this because they don't want to give Trump credit. Because everything they're doing right now is, they think psychologically, is making them look tougher. Oh, we need to stand up to someone like Trump. We need to stand up to some maniac who doesn't know the ins and outs of politics, who's going to disrupt the system. But yet this goes on periodically. They refuse to tell the general Canadian public about this. So 4 criminal organizations based in Western Canada are considered high-level threats to the security of the country, according to a new report by Criminal Intelligence Service Canada. The federal agency, which is responsible for collecting information from police across the country, said that organized crime remains a preeminent threat to Canadian security, contributing to thousands of deaths annually from overdoses due to illicit drugs, as well as firearms and gang violence. Criminal organizations are mostly diverse and involved in multiple markets, making it increasingly important to assess organized crime by its impact through cooperative transnational networks, and consequentially not to address the threat in isolation, Director General Ken Lamonte of the Intelligence Service said. The high-level threats groups were not identified by name, but the descriptions of Western gangs mirror the BC-based Wolfpack Gang Alliance and the United Nations Gang, among others in the province. One of the Western gangs had a network extending across North America and into Central and South America, as well as into Europe, the report said. It is involved in fentanyl, cocaine, methamphetamine, money laundering, homicide, and intimidation slash extortion. It is a predominant player in the gang conflicts. Another of the BC groups has connections across the continent and into the Caribbean, European, and Oceania. It is involved in cocaine, methamphetamine, firearms, fraud, vehicle theft, money laundering, homicide, and intimidation. It has direct contact with transnational drug trafficking organizations who supply drugs and help coordinate logistics, the report said. The third high-risk BC criminal organization has a network across North America into Asia. It is involved in cocaine, fentanyl, precursor chemicals, cannabis, fraud, money laundering, loan sharking, bookmaking, and intimidation slash extortion, the annual report said. It uses individuals with specialized skills using a hierarchy of roles depending on the specific job to optimize the group's overall proficiency. The fourth group, described as leaders currently in custody, just like the Wolfpack, and appears to have the broadest scope extending to various countries in North America, South America, Europe, Asia, and Oceania. It is involved in fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, firearms, money laundering, homicide, and intimidation. Despite the incarceration of several key members, it continues to operate at a high level, indicating that its operational redundancies are firmly in place. Post Media revealed, that's who owns the Vancouver Sun, Post Media revealed that a record-setting fentanyl super lab in Falkland, raided by the RCMP in October, was set up by Wolfpack. High-profile members Damian Ryan and James Ryanch are currently in jail in Winnipeg and the Philippines, respectively. 3 other organized crime groups based in central Canada also topped the list of the 668 gangs assessed in the 2024 report. So, it looks like Donald Trump, of all people, the game show host with the big mouth, may have been onto something. That maybe all this criminal activity that ordinary Canadians have been screaming about, screaming at their elected leaders to do something about, they haven't done anything because they're complicit to this. Because we know that these organized crimes are connected, they're corrupted into the federal government. They're allowed to sneak through the borders. They get fraudulent documents to set up shop here in Canada, and it's affecting an international conglomeracy of other countries. That's why Donald Trump is stating this. That is why Donald Trump is taking these tariff threats serious. Because he knows that this is affecting America. He knows this is affecting Americans. And if he sees a neighboring country involved in international organized crime, that is problematic. That is problematic. That's when you go and say something about it. Hey, maybe you should fix up your country. Maybe you should deal with these crises. Not just for my sake, but also for regular Canadians that are also affected by this. Assessed groups included a combined 12,075 criminal actors operating throughout the country, many of whom interact with more than one group. Extraordinary involvement to account for the number of unassessed groups. Criminal involvement could potentially currently consist of more than 70,000 individuals, the report said. The number of groups involved in manufacturing synthetic drugs almost doubled in a year, from 51 in 2023 to 99 in 2024. Of those, a third are also involved in importing, highlighting the the dependence of acquiring precursor chemicals from other source countries to domestically produce fentanyl and methamphetamine, the report said. Groups are shifting to the synthetic drug market in part due to the record low cocaine prices. Clandestine labs are primarily set up in BC, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec. So it turns out Mexico isn't the cartel country that it once was. It turns out it's us. Us, happy-go-lucky Canadians are involved in a huge organized crime scandal. We're run by a mafia. And it took Donald Trump, out of all people, to finally shake the boat enough for people to start noticing this. Politicians don't want to notice this. They don't want you to read into this. They still want to gaslight you and say this is only a 1% problem. Oh, fentanyl is not, it's not terrible. It's not nothing to worry about. It's only like 1% of the country that's affected by this. They don't want to tell you that 70,000 individuals just in those couple gangs are involved, are criminals involved in drug trafficking, human smuggling, firearms, gang-related violence, all across the country. All across the country. So yes, that's going to deeply affect America. And yes, that's why Donald Trump stated originally about this crisis and why he put the tariffs on to get the Canadian government to recognize this, get a boot up their ass to resolve this. But yet they want to frame this as Donald Trump being a maniac and he wants to take over Canada for the 51st state. So, Blender News, who's been amazing at breaking down these organized crime cartels. They do a podcast. I highly recommend checking out their work. They do a lot of great, interesting stuff. We should actually get them on at some point, do an interview. Blender News says, like it or not, Trump's tariffs highlight a brutal truth. Canada is run by criminals for criminals. 4,000 organized crime groups. Organized crime doubled since 2021. Ties to 77 countries. CSIS, so the Canadian Intelligence Agency. Many members of organized crime groups are involved in areas of the public sector. So the organized cartels, not only are they corrupted and allowed to get away with it with the federal government, but they're involved in the government. They have positions of power. Do you see how problematic this is? Do you see why someone like Trump would notice this and pointing out viciously to Canadian politicians? Especially because Canadians ourselves have been screaming about this for a while. And politicians continue to gaslight you and lie to you and do nothing about it. Why? Because they're in bed with these cartels. They're in bed with the organized criminals. Most of them probably are criminals. So here's a breakdown that they did through Blender News. Listen to this.
Even if you oppose Donald Trump's tariffs, there's no arguing with his assessment. Canada is a nation run by criminals for criminals. During a recent parliamentary meeting, the RCMP made a stunning admission.
How many organized crime groups are involved?
Over 4,000 organized crime groups in Canada, as assessed by the Criminal Intelligence Service Canada.
4,000 individual organized crime groups, all with their own distinct leadership and membership?
That's correct.
According to a public safety report, the average organized crime group consists of 20 to 50 members. If we take the median estimate of 35 members per group, that means Canada has approximately 140,000 gangsters and mobsters operating within its borders. These are not petty criminals struggling.
140,000 potential criminals involved in these gangs. Hey, another 10,000 more and they might as well be liberal voters. Now, again, you understand why Trump did what he did. You understand that aside all the maniac stuff that you could say about Trump, that he may have been on par about this. That we know about the deep darkness within the corruption of Canada, that criminal organized gangs have been operating in this country for quite an extensive long time, that the scandals continue to elude. We just had we did an article on Monday there about the deep money laundering scheme that involves a lot of these big banks, including TD. This is no shocker to people, but for those who don't see it right away, because CBC is not telling you about this, CTV News is not telling you about this, Global News is not telling you about this, any of the major news outlets and publications are refusing to touch this. And they want you to still believe that Trump is the maniac that wants to destroy Canada. Oh, he's intentionally going after the Canadian democracy and the economy. He's purposely making it crash. And refusing to point out that, hey, Trump mentioned about fentanyl. Trump mentioned about organized crime. Maybe he's onto something about this.
Struggling to make ends meet, they are professionals. This explosion of organized crime is staggering. In 2011, a national security report estimated there were around 800 organized crime groups in Canada. Fast forward just 14 years, and that number has ballooned by 400%. Even in just the last 4 years, organized crime has doubled, with a 20...
So, that report, in 2011, they had 800 organized crime groups. In 2011. Even before Justin Trudeau. That was during Stephen Harper's years. And they just allowed it to happen. Why? Because these organized crime cartels are in bed with the Parliament government. Both the Liberal and Conservative. Both any political party in power. That's how dangerous this is, ladies and gentlemen. You're run by a mafia. I hate to break the news to you. I hate to be the black pill Debbie Downer here. But you're ruled by a mafia. We don't have a democracy. We don't have sovereignty. Our nation is practically gone, and it's ruled by cartels and globalists. And no Canadian's really saying a word about this, but they'll get angry at Trump because the television tells them to. The same television that used to adore Trump. The same television that brought you Trump to mainstream attention. They gave him a freaking reality show for a decade. They gave him Emmy Awards. They invited him on the talk shows. But they want you to be angry at Trump and not angry at the fact that your country has been eroded for over a decade.
2021 RCMP report estimating 2,000 groups compared to today's 4,000. Worse still, these groups are not just growing in number, they are deeply embedded in Canadian society. And they're violent. The RCMP has admitted that 73% of assessed organized crime groups are involved in violent activities, including assaults, extortion, shootings, and homicides. More than half have international connections across 77 countries. Many members of organized crime groups are involved in the public sector, leveraging family connections, romantic relationships, and monetary gain to further corruption within government institutions. Our own government openly admits that organized crime has infiltrated the public sector, yet it continues to implement policies that enable criminal enterprises to thrive. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Consider the actions of the Trudeau government. Soft on crime laws, including the rollback of mandatory minimum sentences for violent offenders. Safe supply policies, where taxpayers fund the distribution of narcotics that often end up on the black market. Mass migration with minimal fraud prevention measures, allowing international criminals to exploit Canada's weak enforcement mechanisms. The RCMP disbanding its financial crimes unit while Canada has become recognized as a global money laundering hub. Liberal cabinet ministers sharing addresses with known international drug smugglers, raising serious questions about corruption at the highest levels. And let's not forget about Cameron Ortiz, a former senior RCMP intelligence official being found guilty of leaking state secrets to organized crime. This isn't a new problem, but it is getting worse. In 2009, a former senior engineer at Quebec's Transport Ministry claimed that the mafia controlled 80% of government contracts. If that was the state of affairs 15 years ago, and crime has only gotten worse since then, what does that say about Canada today? There is little distinction left between Canada's government and its criminal underworld. At this point, the two are intertwined, operating in tandem to the detriment of ordinary Canadians. With Canada at a crossroads for leadership and a potential election looming, the stakes could not be higher. Any leader who does not place corruption and crime at the top of their agenda must be assumed to have a vested interest in seeing Canada remain a lawless playground for criminals. Without widespread accountability and legal measures taken against public officials who sell out Canada to criminals and foreign states, we will remain in the crosshairs of Donald Trump.
Wow. I mean, I don't even have more words to say about it. Like, our country, if we can even still call it a country, it's just a playground of organized crime. Is just an absolute catastrophe, on its knees, on its deathbed. And the only thing that our politicians have left, the same politicians that immediately just for years have tried to destroy the country, all they have left is to point the finger at Trump and use Trump as a clutch to keep them in power, to keep them relevant. Because if more and more Canadians are aware about this, they would understand that the whole parliamentarian is absolutely corroded. The whole parliamentarian is absolutely corrupted. That we need a complete exile away from parliamentary politics. So, I like this woman, Nadine Ness, points out, why does it take Trump threatening tariffs for Canada to do something about the fentanyl problem? We should have been dealing with this without a tariff threat. Canada police seize fentanyl and make hundreds of arrests as tariff threat looms large. That's from this place called The Logic. Well, the reason why all of a sudden it has become such a big deal now is because Donald Trump, despite his flaws, despite what people feel about him, I'm no fan of the guy myself, despite all that, actually brought it to mainstream attention. Donald Trump actually brought to attention that there is a fentanyl crisis. Something that's been around since 2011, apparently, according to those reports. It could be even earlier than that. But since 2011, this has been going around. That Canada has become a hotbed of organized crimes, of these criminal cartels that have been involved in mass murder, that have been involved in human trafficking and smuggling and drug trafficking and transferring all around the world, interconnected with all these different countries that predominantly affect also Americans. And that's why Donald Trump came to attention and said, no, we got to do something about this. So the reason why it took Donald Trump is because the mainstream media and the politicians are so completely corrupted and complicit to the organized crime cartel, to the globalist agenda, to the haywire neoliberal establishment dystopia that we live in, that they're never going to tell you about this. But it took someone like Trump to witness this, realize that's going to affect his people, and since Donald Trump says he's going to combat the drug problem and going to deport criminals and dealing with the immigration crisis, that's going to be part of his priority. Part of his priority is to figure out where it came from, and he's going to look at Canada, and since Canada's had this problem for quite an extensive long time, yeah, we're going to have to mention that. And if you don't clean up your act, we're going to put more tariffs on. So, it's sad that we have to deal with this. It's sad that we have to put tariffs on to finally get attention to this and finally deal with these measures. But sadly, if that's what it's going to take to get our politicians to recognize this, which a lot of politicians are still ignoring this, but we need to bring up more ruckus. That's why we need these rallies, not focusing on Trump and focusing on the hate of America from your television screen, but we need to be focused on the true corruption and why these tariffs exist in the first place. And it's because Canadian politicians have eroded this country to its deathbed. And Donald Trump is looking at the hotbed of organized crime in Canada and realizing that's going to affect his own people. It's going to affect Americans. And because he's the American president, he's going to take notice about this. And this is all in coordination with the Liberal government, in coordination with Stephen Harper and the Conservative government. The whole parliamentary system is absolutely corrupted.